Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. On the show tonight, we are taking a look at President Joe Biden's debate prep against Donald Trump, what he has in store at Camp David. Meanwhile, President Trump is reposting memes saying that he's going to be preparing for the debate by going into a senior citizen's home and finding whoever is around. We'll take a look at the debate prep there on both sides. Also, a big continuing threat we are watching is Israeli and really U.S.-backed war with Lebanon. Barack Ravid has another musing from the White House for us to dissect. Also, an interesting piece in Mondo Weiss, understanding some of the history of Israel's threats with Lebanon and the possible relationship we have. We're really going to go deep with the potential contours of what a conflict, Israeli, kind of U.S.-backed conflict with Lebanon might look like. Also, a senior Ukrainian military leader is sacked by Vladimir Zelensky. But first, big news today, as really a kind of shocking moment. Ladies and gentlemen, after many years of campaigning, of activizing, mobilizing, activating, I guess you could say, Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks, whistleblower, I guess you could say, has been finally freed. And it really was something I did not expect to get, because I know he was fighting off a deportation case, or I guess an extradition case, to the United States from the UK. But he has, I really don't think it could have ended any better. He's got a U.S. plea deal, which is going to end one of the biggest releases, the legal saga over one of the biggest releases of classified materials in U.S. history. And he essentially has spent so much time locked up in some form or another, really also just in prison after the Ecuadorian president, I think his name's Lenin Moreno, or something like that, gave him up in a few years back. He has since been in the custody of the Crown, the good old Crown Prosecution Service, and His Majesty's, I guess now, Royal Belmarsh Prison. Earlier this year, he was put on trial. And the case was whether to say, do we send him to the United States, because the prison was so bad. Essentially they were almost certain, as his lawyers were saying, they were almost certain he was going to commit suicide as soon as he got there. According to court filings on Monday, Assange has agreed with the U.S. Department of Justice to plead guilty to one charge of conspiracy to obtain and disseminate classified information linked to U.S. national defense in connection with what prosecutors have described as one of the biggest compromises of classified material in the country's history. But again, they still have not been able to point to one, active life that has been in any way threatened by what Julian Assange did. But, one thing they cannot say is they have not been incredibly embarrassed by the, from everything to what Chelsea Manning collaborated with him about, with the collateral murder video, I guess, which just essentially shows the United States laughing at killing civilians, all the way to the release and the hacking of the Hillary Clinton emails, which also did provide a pretty interesting insight, especially into her time as Secretary of State. He has provided a lot of embarrassment to a lot of very powerful people. He is scheduled to submit his plea on Wednesday morning in a federal court in Saipan, which is in the part of the Northern Mariana Islands, a U.S. Commonwealth north of Guam. Sentencing is set to happen immediately after the plea submission. Assange has already spent 62 months in a UK jail, and prosecutors are not seeking additional imprisonment. So once this plea deal goes through, he should be able to walk free. The Saipan court was chosen because Assange has declined to carry out the proceedings in the continental U.S. Is also closer to his home country of Australia, where he's expected to go after the proceedings concluded, according to a letter from prosecutors to the court. So it's also been interesting, the Aussie role in this, because they have essentially looked at this guy who is an Australian citizen, especially the kind of Labour voters of the Australian Labour Party, which is the current leading government in Australia at the moment, and the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Albar, as they call him. They have essentially said, why are we letting one of our own get essentially prosecuted, essentially get threatened to be put in U.S. prison for leaking awful war crimes the United States did? And why don't we do more to kind of stand up to this? And, he was very, very popular, very well supported among a pretty broad swath of the Australian left and center left, to the point where Albanese had to, put some pressure of his own, saying, we really want this to be worked out. We want this prosecution to be dropped, because, they really almost had to make it awkward with the United States, because people were so pissed off about what was being done to Julian Assange. Really, in a kind of dark world, it is great to see that somebody who has provided us with a lot more knowledge, a lot better understanding of the United States government and its inner workings than really any journalist out there today, he is not going to be put behind bars for, ever. He's not going to be essentially murdered in a U.S. prison, which is going to be a very, very big deal. So Julian Assange is free, WikiLeaks is saying, adding they had paid severely for publishing stories of government corruption and human rights abuses. The agreement aims, again, Trump was going to try to assassinate him in London, in the Ecuadorian embassy. The agreement aims to resolve what's been a remarkable standoff between the DOJ and Assange, the controversial advocate for government transparency, who has been one of its most high-profile and divisive defendants, and whose legal troubles have spanned multiple countries. So again, in 2010, the site published a cache of military and secret documents leaked by Chelsea Manning, the former U.S. intelligence analyst who, while serving in Iraq, copied hundreds of thousands of military incident logs and about 250,000 diplomatic cables. Sweden in 2010 issued an arrest warrant for Assange linked to a rape investigation, so which that was later dropped because it essentially had no evidence to it. But then that was essentially what they used to ensnare him. Australia's Labour government has been privately lobbying Washington to find a solution to Assange's case since it was elected in 2022. Prime Minister Albanese has been clear. Assange's case has dragged on for too long, and he is nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, it said in a statement on Tuesday. So a big victory for press freedom for the left and for Labour Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. We are also taking a look at Joe Biden and his preparations for the presidential debate, and which is also, I believe, is coming up pretty darn soon. So he's in Camp David at the moment. He is hunkering down. He's got a movie theater and an airplane hangar have been outfitted with lights and production equipment to create a mock debate stage. Kind of let Biden know, it's like, this is debate. We're supposed to be practicing for the debate. So hopefully they do it at all times of the day to prepare him to be up, past the set of the sun, which, he sometimes struggles with. But Biden is entering his fifth day of preparations at the presidential retreat in the woods of northern Maryland for Thursday's debate against Donald Trump. Camp David has become the epicenter for an administration and campaign effort to help Biden shake off the rust that often comes with being an incumbent on the defense and combat widespread voter concerns that he is too old to be an effective president. So I feel like, a solid State of the Union performance, which is what I honestly do think that, we could get. It could really assert and kind of push the momentum back in Biden's favor as we get, closer to the conventions here. I think, they're really going to drug him up. They're not going to risk anything. And, whatever deep state concoction that, kind of enabled Biden to have a really good State of the Union performance, he's going to be on that. He's going to be, Trump is going to be probably a little bit crazy. He's not going to let him get off easy. But I think it'll also be very interesting to see how many people watch and how many people want to watch a election debate this early in the year. Earliest presidential debate in modern history. That is between two people that most Americans look at the two candidates and be like, oh, they just cover their eyes, plug their ears, and go, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear, like these are the people that are running. That is, it's going to be interesting to see how much of this debate makes an impact. But I do think Biden probably is going to do pretty well. I mean, he's been preparing for quite a long time. He's got Ron Klain back in there managing debate preparations, and he's aware of missteps incumbents have made in the past. In 2012, President Barack Obama failed in his first re-election debate and had to quickly reorient for the second one. So they'll be working to position Biden not only as a president who in the midst of a re-election campaign, but also as a fighter who can counterpunch on the fly. I think it's going to be tough. Trump, an opponent who is adept at extemporaneous insult, skipped the primary debates that could have sharpened his skill. The rust factor is real. Okay, David Axelrod. It's not real for Trump. I'm sorry. Also, you know what? I have seen him kind of, not getting as much reaction to some of the, little riffs that he's gone on. He doesn't have his full aura. I think it's taken a hit, at least in recent, weeks. I can't even tell you why, but some of the clips that I've been seeing, normally he'd be talking about, literally, I am not lying, he would be talking about, how the toilets, now you have to press flush on the toilets like 2 or 3 times. Back in my day, you don't have to press it once. Like, what's happening with the toilets? And there'd be literally just people in some exurban, town in Pennsylvania just being like, yeah, that's right, tell them about the toilets, woo! They'd be laughing, they'd be hooting, they'd be hollering, and that's just to hear a few people. It's like, this was like, I'm talking about back in, the height of the lead up to the 2020 election. Even like that's when he was really even like when he'd be talking about, I just want to get my big truck and I want to drive away, I don't want to ever come back. Like that's when people, I think, were really like, they were just laughing and loving and cheering that. Like, it's like and even when he'd just be like, it sucks to be around all these people, I want to go away, and then they'd just be like, yeah, that's right, we suck, we're gonna pass out a heat stroke. Although people have already passed out a heat stroke this term or this campaign in Phoenix, so maybe the enthusiasm there. We will see, but I do think Trump, probably doesn't need that much practice to insult people and won't get rusty at it. Unfortunately for David Axelrod, officials on Biden's campaign believe the debate will provide an opportunity to go on the offensive on recent issues like abortion and immigration. In recent days, Biden has unveiled a program that will create new pathways to citizenship for people married to American citizens, while Trump has suggested that migrants form a league to fight one another. And there's a new branch of the UFC. If I don't think Trump will probably have a pithy line to respond to that. So, I could just only imagine Biden being like, well, you want migrants to fight each other for sport. And then, Trump being like, that's right, I do. Isn't it wonderful? It'll be the best idea I've ever had. And then, the whole crowd going crazy, because this is, as we've talked about, this is a, kind of pro-immigrant environment, that Biden, or anti-immigrant environment, that Biden has continuously fed into with his rhetoric, with his policy, with his complete acknowledgement of what has been going on in the border as a crisis, refusing to make any sort of kind of counter-argument, and essentially being like, yeah, I want to stop the immigration, any kind of new immigration into the country. That is 100% right. But also, we're going to go give a bunch of citizenship to people that are already here. That may do something to assuage, some of the more moderate Democrats, some of the more, partisans who may have been pissed off about it. But honestly, I don't think it's going to be, the people who are really decisively voting on immigration in the kind of more immigration stance. They're not that many of them, honestly, and a lot of them are probably pissed off about Biden, with other things, or, going to vote for him, just regardless to suck it up because they believe Trump is going to be a lot worse, despite, some of the rhetoric that we've seen out of the Biden administration. But the much, much, much larger coterie of people that are going to be voting decisively on immigration from a perspective of limiting immigration, they are just going to, view this policy as absolutely ridiculous. They didn't believe Biden, when he did the hardline policy, when he did the hawkish policy of shutting down the border after 2,500 encounters for asylum seekers. Like, they were just like, this is a joke, this is a fraud. Trump said he was pretending to do something. So he's not going to gain any credibility here, I don't think, from anyone on it. So it may not be his strongest suit. I think just hitting, the democracy, the threat to democracy, some of the crazy things that Trump has said he's going to do in terms of like dictatorship and stuff, I think that honestly, given his many, many weaknesses that he kind of has to avoid, that could be his strongest suit. I mean, leading into defending democracy at home and abroad against Trump, and then, also do something like Ukraine as well, and then maybe sprinkle in a little abortion there. And you got what's probably, Biden's best message, and just, pointing to the weird, crazy things that Trump is going to be bound to say on the debate stage and being like, okay, remember America, this guy was pretty crazy. I may be drooling, but this guy is absolutely crazy, and he wants to, destroy democracy and also take away your right to, contraception or something like that. Like, that is probably the best message that Biden could, push coming out of this stuff. I would not really hit the immigration stuff that hard because I don't think he's really winning with any constituency on that in a big way, although I may be wrong. But, to people who are really moving to Biden on terms of best to handle immigration, either from the pro or anti-immigration side, not going to be that many. For the reasons that I just laid out. Biden's advisors say the setting itself will help highlight the Trump's weaknesses and allow the president to combat the idea presented in a slew of misleading videos that he is bumbling in public. Biden and Trump will meet in a closed studio in Atlanta with no live audience. Each candidate's microphone will be muted when it is not his turn to speak, but it will still be live television, broadcast on CNN with moderators who will be under pressure to fact-check both men in real time, but who have downplayed any expectation that they will wade into rebuttal territory. David Chalian, CNN's political director, told the New York Times over the weekend that the moderators would focus on facilitating the debate between these candidates, not being a participant in that debate. So maybe some chance for CNN to bring some wider, respect back to its name after a pretty rough rating session in the kind of post-Trump era. But it is, it's gonna be very interesting. I'm interested to see how it's gonna be, playing out. Trump, I'm assuming, will kind of always be Trump, and I think Biden is going to be more to have a State of the Union Biden. As opposed to, walking off on D-Day Biden, which, again, that video, even the good video, still didn't look very good. I'm sorry. But anyway, we are moving on to the international arena here. This is from Barack Ravid, a transmission from the White House, essentially, which is going to be very interesting to pay attention to regarding all things Lebanon and Hezbollah. During his visit to Beirut last week, and again, we're finally noticing, we heard Hassan Nasrallah in his speech after, of course, leader of Hezbollah there, making a reference in his speech after the U.S. left to, threats from mediators, which I think probably was something to do with what Amos Hochstein had to say. Apparently, Hochstein told Lebanese officials that Hezbollah is wrong to think the U.S. would be able, I love that framing, able to stop Israel from invading Lebanon if the militia continues its attacks, according to a U.S. official. I mean, honestly, again, within the framework of, the leverage that they're willing to employ, they're absolutely right. They will not be able to stop Israel from invading Lebanon by asking nicely. Biden's strategy, which has been, trying to look like, he cares about the genocide and what Israel's doing and trying to limit Israel's excesses, towards his public by saying, we're asking Netanyahu not to do this. We're trying to get them to not do that, while essentially refusing to use any leverage and essentially letting Netanyahu do whatever he wants. That, has a side effect cost, which makes Biden look incredibly weak. And in that framework where he just goes, please don't do this, guys, please. I don't want you to invade Lebanon. They're just, going to be like, no, we're invading Lebanon. Sorry. And there's nothing you can do about it. And in that framework, they'd be right. But, Yoav Gallant, who, by the way, is literally about to be subject to an arrest warrant from the ICJ. They're applying right now for a warrant for his arrest. And he is in Washington right now. He's in the United States territory, I guess, right now, despite being, nearly an international wanted war criminal, to beg for more weapons to prosecute this war, to give us more weapons to finish the job, as Benjamin Netanyahu complained to Joe Biden on video. So with that leverage, you have so much power, and it's something you're absolutely not using, and which makes me come to the conclusion that all this histrionics, all this, we don't want them to do this, we really just can't stop them, all that is for show, and it's their desired policy outcome, but because of the political repercussions to be supporting Israel and doing what they're doing right now, both at home and in their standing abroad, people like Amos Hochstein, people like Biden are going to be like, we're not able to stop them. Sorry. And they'll just take the hit of looking incredibly, incredibly weak while they do so, which I think, more than, given that Americans are Americans, more than the moral side of what's going on in Gaza, I think Biden is really being hit for it. kind of on the front of. This is a guy who's completely letting Israel take advantage of him. The Biden administration, they're highly concerned that both Israel and Hezbollah are miscalculating as they escalate their rhetoric and fighting on the ground while they are thinking they can avoid an all-out war. Like, again, we have the option to stop this. We are the ones providing them with weapons. They are the ones that are desperately coming to us begging for weapons. But again, we are just absolutely, unmoved in terms of actually stopping this. U.S. officials are also concerned that without a ceasefire in Gaza, a war between Israel and the Lebanese militant group is becoming more likely, which would dramatically exacerbate the regional crisis and draw the U.S. deeper into the conflict. Again, all stoppable. Hochstein traveled to Lebanon last week from Israel after talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He met in Beirut with Lebanese Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri, Acting PM Najib Mikati, and Commander of the Lebanese military, General Joseph Aoun, and other officials. The situation is serious. What President Biden wants to do is avoid further escalation to a greater war, Hochstein said before leaving Beirut last Tuesday for another meeting with Netanyahu in Jerusalem. It will take everyone's interest in ending the conflict now, and believe that there is a pathway diplomatically to do it if the sides agree to it. Again, there's no effort to force, Israel, who has just been thumbing their nose at this U.S. peace deal, Netanyahu doing it yet again today to put pressure on this. They're going to give them more and more weapons. They're not going to threaten to cut off any shipments. They're not going to threaten to literally enforce their own humanitarian laws to stop something that I think they do genuinely believe is going to be a bad thing, but they just are completely afraid to break the framework, which is really, really remarkable. And this whole BS, like, oh, we can't stop them. They're just, they got a mind of their own. They get real crazy. It's all BS. They know exactly what's going on. They can't stop them, and they're choosing not to. What does that tell you? A Western diplomat said that after Hochstein's visit, Hezbollah sent messages back to the U.S. through third parties saying that while it doesn't want a war, the group is also confident it can hit Israel significantly if it invades Lebanon. So it's going to be interesting to see, what type of support, if they're going to, increase already their substantial support of Israel if they get into a bigger war. And honestly, given the way the U.S. has kind of been very, very reactive so far, I guess they'll, probably continue their same level of support, which is a pretty significant amount. But which is a pretty likely if, I think at this point, if Israel kind of takes a little bit of an embarrassing hit in the first few, kind of opening stages of their war in Lebanon, I think you can really expect the U.S. to probably try and surge support, surge involvement in some way, because I think, even the U.S. is probably underestimating what Hezbollah can do to the IDF in a short period of time, and the Israelis are definitely underestimating it. But, of course, that all changes with the impact of U.S. support. I think it's very conceivable that you see something break out very, very soon, and Netanyahu just essentially tries to hedge his bets, create some chaos for Biden. Another war that the U.S. is kind of dragged into, supporting, kicking, and screaming when they clearly don't want to. Another, kind of humiliation by Netanyahu of Biden, and that essentially giving him that extra little bit he needs to lose the election. Trump gets in there, and everything gets resolved with a decidedly, pro-Israel tint. And Netanyahu, squeaks out the next election. I think that's a very conceivable turn of events there, of just, kind of Netanyahu hedging his bets. So again, it does seem like the tension regarding the United States and in Lebanon at this point, and Israel and Lebanon at this point, is really at a knife's edge. Hezbollah is, again, this is the main force behind, for some context here in Mondoes from Qassam Wadi, they're the main force behind the Lebanese resistance movement, which started after the withdrawal of the PLO from Beirut and entry of Israeli forces into the Lebanese capital in September of 1982. At the time, the Lebanese National Resistance Front was formed, comprised of leftist and pan-Arab parties who would begin an armed campaign against Israeli forces. Hezbollah's name wasn't known yet to the public. After the Lebanese Civil War ended in 1990, all Lebanese forces who took part in it agreed to disarm, including those forming the Resistance Front. While some communist and nationalist guerrilla units remain active in the occupied Lebanese south, the force that began to receive major support from both Syria and Iran was the Shiite Islamic resistance of Lebanon and its political wing, Hezbollah. By 1992, Hezbollah was basically the only force fighting the Israeli occupation south of the Litani, which is where Israel essentially wants to push Hezbollah back to, was this river. Israel's sudden withdrawal from the south of Lebanon in May of 2000 was seen as, by many, including in Israel, as a victory for Hezbollah in two main reasons. This kind of slow-drawing civil war from the early 90s through 2000. First, because it happened without any security arrangements with the Lebanese state. Although the Lebanese army did deploy in the south, there were no restrictions on Lebanese military activity on the border similar to the ones imposed on Egypt in the Camp David Accords of 1979. Most importantly, there are no arrangements to guarantee any clearance of Hezbollah's presence from the border. Second, the political impact of the withdrawal led to the moment of reawakening among the Arab audiences, who witnessed unprecedented images of Lebanese civilians pouring into evacuated Israeli detention centers and breaking their prisoners free. Lebanese farmers were seen tearing down military barbed wire fencing and breaching their fields for the first time in 18 years. And the villagers paraded abandoned Israeli vehicles through the villages of southern Lebanon. The nature of the withdrawal gave an unprecedented political boost to the cause of the resistance and Hezbollah as a political party, as well as the influence of its main ally and sponsor, Iran. The political strength was given an even greater boost after Israel's war in Lebanon in 2006, during which it failed to achieve its stated goals and suffered military losses. The major unresolved issue for both sides, however, is that there is no official drawing of mutually recognized borders. The UN oversaw the defining of the line with Israel, calling it the oversaw the defining of the line to which Israel withdrew, calling it the Blue Line. The line kept Sheba Farms and Kufr Shuba Hills, which are two Lebanese farming areas, under Israeli control. The Sheba Farms and Kufr Shuba, this is after Israel went in. In the 80s, they essentially went out, I guess, at least at the UN, with these two territories, which were seized in this war, to put it kindly, questionable legality. The Sheba and Kufr Shuba territories became the favorite space for Hezbollah to respond to Israeli incursions into Lebanon or the bombing of its members in Syria after 2011, considering it was not protecting Israel per se, but occupied Lebanese territory. The question of the drawing of those borders became tied to the region's economic mega-games in 2009 when natural gas was discovered in the eastern Mediterranean near Lebanese shores. Israel began to offer contracts to gas companies for the exploitation of gas in the area disputed with Lebanon. In 2002, Lebanon and Israel signed a maritime border agreement after a series of negotiations during which Hezbollah threatened to target Israeli gas facilities that remain in any waters claimed by Lebanon. Hezbollah even released footage of Israeli oil fields and of its own rockets. Many saw the agreement itself as another victory for Hezbollah and a rare kind of acknowledgement that Israel couldn't just do whatever it wanted to Lebanon, and that Hezbollah was going to be a force they would have to at least reckon with. Israel's second attempt to undermine Hezbollah after the failed 2006 war during the years following the outbreak of the Syrian war in 2011. Israel systematically bombed targets it claimed to belong to Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, taking advantage of the chaos in the country. Israel maintained that it was targeting the corridors that Iran used to deliver weapons to Hezbollah, and Israeli military called these strikes the battle between the wars, aimed at weakening their northern foe. The intervention of Hezbollah in the Syrian war on the side of the Syrian government was a major element in securing the defeat of the rebel groups in strategic areas like the eastern Damascus Ghouta, the Kamamun mountain chain, and the Khazir area, all of which were key points for any takeover of Damascus by the rebels. Hezbollah also helped defeat ISIL on the Lebanese border, fighting beside the Lebanese army and becoming a major player in the regional war to defeat the fanatic group. Most importantly, Hezbollah secured the necessary territory in Syria to maintain its open supply lines from Iran by itself, hence outflanking any Israeli attempts to weaken it and really strengthening it. Since the early 1990s, Hezbollah's strategy throughout major events in the region has been that of accumulating force, both military and political. And right now, with its really kind of good, solid link to Iran, it is stronger than ever. It'll be interesting to see what the U.S., which could be kind of the turning point force, does in this situation. But definitely a situation we'll continue to watch very, very closely for you here on Newsflash. All right, to close things out today, we are getting into this from the Financial Times. Christopher Miller, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked Lieutenant General Yuri Sodol as commander of the joint forces of the country's army hours after complaints about his conduct in the war with Russia were made by a prominent soldier. Zelensky announced on Monday evening that Brigadier General Andrei Hernatsov would replace Sodol, the latest shakeup to Ukraine's senior military leadership. The changes came after Bohdan Khrushchev, chief of staff of the Azov National Guard Brigade, accused Sodol of incompetence on the battlefield and blamed him for the death of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers under his command. This comes as Russia's armed forces have slowly seized the initiative in Ukraine after Kiev's failed counteroffensive last year, and a 6-month delay in U.S. military assistance that allowed Moscow to make fresh territorial gains. In a rare display of public criticism of Ukraine's military leadership by a serving officer, Khrushchevich, I think that's exactly the right way. Don't know if that's exactly the right way of saying it, but he wrote on Telegram that he appealed to the State Bureau of Investigations to conduct a probe into Sodol's Congress. I wrote a letter to SBI with a call to launch an investigation against one of the military general who, in my opinion, has killed more Ukrainian soldiers than any Russian general. I don't care if they start an investigation against me. I don't care if they put me in prison. I care that combatants and brigade commanders are judged for the loss of an observation post, but the general is not judged for the loss of regions and dozens of cities and the loss of thousands of soldiers. So it really does show kind of come at a time when Ukrainian morale is really a lot worse, I think, than a lot of Western media is letting on. There is a huge kind of lack of just pure manpower within Ukraine and just a real kind of unwillingness. Again, this is what I've always said. I think Ukrainians should be armed. I think they should be able to, push to a fight. And I think it's, not something that is in any way tenable for the United States to, allow, I guess. I don't really buy that much in that kind of rhetoric, but I think it is a just cause to help the Ukrainians stop invading Russia, kind of in their territory within reason. It's a point where we should pick, though, a place to fight to, and in concert with Ukrainians, make that known, and that I think would be, again, a big stepping point, a big starting point in peace negotiations, and drawing essentially a line in the sand with Putin at some point so this war doesn't go on forever, but that does not seem to be U.S. intentions here, and it really has, suffered Ukrainian morale, and this story, I think, makes it that much clearer. I think it's just a real lack of manpower to a point where you see some of the pictures in the front lines, it's mind-blowing, some of the things. Some of the, they look like they're 50, 60-year-old guys. They're not in any, fighting shape at the moment in a lot of ways, Ukraine, and it is very unfortunate to see when you have the U.S. kind of all hopped up on this proxy war type situation. And I think it's pretty undeniable at this point that this is a proxy war, at least from the perspective of the U.S., which, again, perspective is often reality, especially, in international relations and things like that. So, with perspective being reality, I think it's definitely going to be interpreted by the U.S., I think, interpreted by Russia, interpreted by anyone who has a good handle on what's going on as this proxy war, which I don't think is being fought, unfortunately so, in the best interest of the Ukrainian people. All right, so what we got for you guys today. We are going to be back on Wednesday with a big show, recapping all things Jamal Bowman. It's going to be incredibly big race. Maybe even do a show on Tuesday night as well. A lot of stuff going on. It's Newsflash.